Good morning, all, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Louis Finkel. I'm the Executive Vice President of API. I want to welcome everyone to our Energy and Election, What America Thinks event. This is part of our Vote for Energy series. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what the program is going to be. So let me start with noting Jack's going to come up in just a few minutes, and he's going to provide you with the results of a Harris poll that shows strong support for forward-looking energy policies and offer some thoughts about how these results reflect voters' desire to embrace our nation's bright energy future. Following his remarks, Monica Trauzzi, the managing editor and host of E&ETV, is going to come on up and sit down with Jack and continue that discussion, after which Jack's going to excuse himself and Monica is going to invite a panel to the stage. So with that, I'm going to be quiet and turn it over to API President and CEO Jack Gerard.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here today, and thank you, Louis, for your introduction as we start. As Louis mentioned, I want to share a few comments with you, and then I've agreed to subject myself to Monica for a few moments. She's promised to be kind today. After which we've got a great panel of experts that are going to tell us about energy and more specifically about what's going to happen this fall in this election cycle. As we begin today, we want to continue on our series of programs, as you can see in the title today, Energy in the Election, What Voters Think. And at your seats, you'll find our recommendations to the party platforms that we shared with many of you in attendance today and others just a few months ago as what we'd recommend to the Democrat Party as well as the Republican Party and where their parties should position themselves on the issue of energy moving forward. In addition to which, though, we have some new data. Not only are we talking about what we think is important, but we've now gone to the public to determine what the public believes is important as it relates to energy. So for a few moments, I want to share some of those findings with you and a few comments about them, and then we'll turn to the panel into a conversation with Monica. The poll, What America is Thinking on Energy Issues, found that 69% of all voters, including 86% of Republicans, 69% of independents, and 57% of Democrats, say they are more likely to support candidates who want to produce more U.S. oil and natural gas. More likely to support those candidates. Broadly, the poll makes clear that when it comes to energy, what matters most to Americans is a reliable, affordable supply of domestic energy. This may be why most Americans want a national energy policy. The poll found that 73% of all voters, including 67% of Republicans, 76% of independents, and 79% of Democrats, support establishing a comprehensive national energy policy that ensures a secure supply, affordable and available for all Americans, done in an environmentally responsible way. There are a few other public policy areas where strong bipartisan majorities agree on a path forward. However, let me suggest that this polling data tells us that there is broad bipartisan support for energy, specifically oil and gas, here in the country. What this makes clear is that the American people want and expect a national energy policy that protects the gains that we have already made in energy security, abundance, and global energy leadership. That's why during this election season and beyond, we at the American Petroleum Institute will continue to promote our candidate, which is energy, specifically oil and natural gas. We're promoting this, which we believe is also consistent with what a vast majority of the American public believes. Today, our nation is the number one producer of oil and natural gas in the world. This dramatic reversal of the American energy landscape in just a few short years is not the product of government regulation or government mandate. It has been brought to you by technological innovation and the free market system. In fact, this nation has achieved something that no other nation on earth has accomplished so far. First, we're increasing our energy production at the time of a growing economy, now albeit the economy is growing slowly, but thirdly, and perhaps most importantly in the current construct, we're reducing our carbon emissions. The only advanced nation in the world that is lowering their carbon emissions at the same time they're producing more energy and growing their domestic economy. This achievement, which we refer to as the U.S. model, serves as a real-world reminder of what this nation's entrepreneurial spirit, unique system of government, and private sector-driven innovation and expertise can accomplish. Here again, voters understand the importance of America's 21st energy renaissance. Our poll found that regardless of political affiliation, there is strong voter support for the role of natural gas in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Over 70% of the American people believe that's an important consideration. The U.S. model makes clear that markets, not government mandates, should guide our nation's energy policy. What should be most important to lawmakers and candidates is what's best for the American public, more specifically, the American consumer, not furthering a particular ideology or appeasing a narrow political constituency. The test that any proposed energy policy or imposed government regulation should satisfy is, will it make energy more affordable for the consumer? Is it better for the environment? Does it grow our economy and enhance our national security? If not, then it clearly isn't what's best for our nation, our environment, or for America's energy future. A good example of an energy policy that fails this test is the renewable fuel standard that many of you are very familiar with. According to our polling data, 77% of all voters are concerned about government mandates to increase ethanol in gasoline as the RFS seeks to do, and that concern is not partisan. 70% of Democrats, 82% of independents, and Republicans are concerned about such ethanol mandates. When you consider that a 2014 Congressional Budget Office study projected that the RFS could raise the cost of fuel for consumers because, quote, given the design of the RFS, the cost of encouraging additional sales of high ethanol fuel falls on producers and consumers of gasoline and diesel, end quote. That's the CBO study. It should be obvious that it is past time for Congress to step in to substantially reform or repeal the renewable fuel standard. The RFS is a good example of what happens when energy policy does not reflect reality or keep pace with current market conditions. The need for affordable, reliable, and abundant energy isn't a Democrat, Independent, or Republican issue. Energy security and global security are not red state or blue state issues. Energy is an American prosperity, economic growth, and opportunity issue that deserves thoughtful debate based on reason, not overheated rhetoric or unworkable slogans. It is our view and that of the majority of the American voters that our nation's energy policy discussion should be an exchange of common sense ideas rooted in reality and based on the inescapable fact that we will need more energy from all sources to meet our nation's energy needs and our demands well into the future. In fact, this is an important scientific-based fact that few people understand. The experts, and most recently the EIA, estimates that fossil fuels will account for 80%, let me emphasize that, 80% of U.S. energy consumption through 2040. And the agency estimates that even under the best-case scenario for alternative fuel use, fossil fuels will still account for over 77% of our energy needs. Translation, America's best energy future is a strategy that's based clearly on all the above, all sources of energy, energy efficiency, and the list goes on. What the U.S. model proves is that we can achieve what were once thought to be contradictory goals. If the markets are allowed to work and those who make policy hear the voices of the American consumers. If we are to continue our nation's current positive energy production trends and environmental gains, we must demand that those who act on our behalf at all levels of government implement energy policies that promote a brighter, better American future in energy based on market-driven principles and our potential as a global energy leader. Our shared goal should be to create a new American understanding of energy, and with it, a national energy policy based on science, the free market, and the entrepreneurial spirit, because energy is too important and fundamental to our way of life for anything less than our collective best efforts to that end. Because in the real world, where people work, learn and play, and raise a family, there is no single source of energy that alone can solve our problems or meet our nation's and the world's growing energy demands. I continue to believe and hope that all of us ultimately have the same goal: to leave our community, our nation, and our world better than we found it for the next generation. In order to do so, we're going to have to build this national energy policy on facts, science, and reality, which says that the oil and natural gas industry will continue to be a dominant player in providing the fuels we oftentimes take for granted well into the future. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd now like to invite Monica to the stage, and we'll visit for a moment and then turn to our expert panelists. Thank you very much. Where do you want to sit,
Sit all the way at the end,
Surely.
or in the middle?
That's great.
Thank you for the invitation, Jack.
You're welcome.
Nice to see you as always. Certainly one of the most interesting campaign cycles to be covering as a journalist, and I'm curious from your perspective as the head of API, what's been most surprising about the discussion on energy coming from the campaigns?
Well, I think to date we probably haven't heard as much about energy as I expect we will into the general election. I'm not sure there's been a lot of surprises other than a few of the perhaps inter-party skirmishes we've seen on some more extreme views, but I expect most of that will moderate as we now know who the two candidates will be going into the fall.
So how do you believe the campaigns should be framing the discussion on energy, and what work are you doing, what work is API doing with the two campaigns, with the Clinton campaign and the Trump campaign?
Our view is, and consistent with the data that we've seen today, is that energy is truly a nonpartisan issue. Unfortunately, it's not characterized like that all the time. But we've reached out to both political parties, both candidacies, in addition to Senate races, House races, governor races, local city councils, whatever it might be, to continue to promote, as we would say, our candidate, and that is energy in this conversation. But if you think about energy generally, and this is why I think if we have a more robust debate in society at large, it is really the underpinning of everything we do. You can talk about it from a job creation perspective, you can talk about it from a national security perspective, you can talk about it from a environmental improvement perspective. We're at 20-year lows in our carbon emissions today. Why? Primarily driven by natural gas consumption. So I think overall it hopefully will play an enhanced role in the general election, but to date we're doing outreach to anyone that will listen, and I think as our data shows today, the public clearly understands this equation. We've just got to get it in a less partisan way, in a more focused way.
So you presented your polling results that point to broad support for fossil fuels and homegrown energy. Americans really support clean energy and broadening the use of clean energy. How do you balance the two? How do you balance the focus on clean energy and the focus on what your group pushes?
Well, we would suggest that we are part of the clean energy equation, and all you have to do is look at the science and the data today. For example, carbon emissions are down in the U.S. today. Why? Driven primarily by increased consumption of cleaner burning natural gas. So I guess one's definition of clean might vary from source to source, but the reality is our economy is based on fossil fuels and petrochemical products, and it will continue to be for many years into the future. That's why I stress the point today. We need to be realistic in the conversation. Our industry takes second seat to nobody in terms of looking for that next energy breakthrough. Next to the federal government, we're the leaders in investment in zero carbon emitting, low carbon emitting technologies. So we are those that are investing, putting our money where our mouth is, if you will, to find that next breakthrough. So if we want to talk about cleaner energy in general terms, let's talk about reality. Natural gas is a cleaner burning source of energy based on our current construct. Criteria pollutants under the Clean Air Act are down, driven heavily by our increased consumption of natural gas. So we're part of that equation. It's
Natural
not
gas
an either
is not
or.
like wind or solar or other forms of renewables.
Well, that's a great point. Where do we think wind and solar comes from? The composites that make up our wind towers and others are built out of petrochemical products, driven heavily by natural gas consumption. So we need to be realistic in this debate. It's a little like the RFS debate that we talked about earlier. A lot of people thought, well, this will be great for the environment. And now the studies, National Academy of Sciences, the Congressional Budget Office, and others are looking at this saying, you know what, this does not help the environment like we thought it would. So we need to look holistically at life cycles. We need to be realistic about what it means to the American consumer when we talk about energy transitions, and just have an informed conversation about it. And at the end of the day, we'll find that we will continue to provide the majority of energy for many years to come.
You talked about the EIA's projections out to 2040 that fossils will continue to play a significant role. Heading out to 2060, though, we see a drop. How is your industry preparing for that drop?
Well, in our industry, as you know, we're energy companies generally. So whether we're producing oil, gas, solar, wind, other forms of renewables, whatever it might be, we're the leaders in energy. And I think you'll continue to see that equation, or those, if you will, the balancing of a true all the above vary as time moves on. Today it's dominated by our primary forms of energy. We fully expect that will continue to evolve. What that will be, it's hard to predict today. We're all looking for that breakthrough that protects the American consumer. The public loves $2.20 gasoline. How do we protect the consumer at the same time get that next great breakthrough into energy?
So as we look beyond the conventions and heading towards November, what are the key energy issues that you think will emerge at the debates and within the campaigns?
Well, I think it's an open question right now. Mr. Trump gave a speech in North Dakota, #2 oil producer in the country, as you know, and laid out a couple key parts that we're concerned with. First, enhanced production opportunities, but second, he focused on the regulatory activity. A lot of people don't realize the current administration today, the oil and gas industry has 106 pending or enacting regulations that we're dealing with today. 106. That's a lot of regulatory activity. So we were pleased when we heard Mr. Trump focus on that and say, you know what, we can't strangle the very economic activity that's going to provide us the base of our economy that we need. So that'll be an important consideration. The other one on the Democratic side, we're anxious to see where Secretary Clinton comes out. There's been a couple people placed on the Democrat National Committee Platform Committee who have some pretty extreme views. There's an individual there whose belief is that the American standard of living and energy consumption should be somewhere between the average Englishman and the average Ethiopian. And when you take World Bank data and you look at that comment, we would have to decrease our electricity consumption in this country by 59 to 99% to meet that standard.
But you're also talking about ramping up efficiency.
Well, absolutely. But those sorts of views, I hope will get sorted out, and we'll get back in this general election to a mainstream, realistic, science-based energy conversation.
Okay, so science-based, do you think there will be a balanced energy production plus climate change sort of acknowledgement that both things can happen concurrently? We can produce energy and also work towards protecting the environment. Will there be a substantive discussion to that end?
Absolutely. We hope so, but we also hope that people will look at what's happening today, because we're having that reality today, right? Carbon emissions are at a 20-year low. If you look at the Clean Power Plant rule today, its goal, I believe, was to achieve reductions of 32% carbon. We're already 17% down. How did that happen? It wasn't a clean power plant. It wasn't government regulation. It was the entrepreneurial spirit of producing additional cleaner burning natural gas because of the vast supply brought the price down to where it became so competitive, it's now being used in our electric generation. Those are the sorts of issues we need to take notice of and say, wow, if we can accomplish this through the free market, let's take a second look at what we're doing in the regulatory arena. Let's have that conversation. We're leading the world today. We were a little bit discouraged when the president went to Paris. We think he should have gone over there with the U.S. model, told the rest of the world, here's how we do it in the United States. We're producing more energy than we ever have. We're lowering our carbon emissions, and our economy is growing. Now, it's not growing near as fast as any of us would like it to, but we've got the stars aligned here. We should use that model worldwide and then think about LNG exports, where clean-burning natural gas could be exported around the world to help others achieve the same thing.
So when Donald Trump talks about protecting the coal industry and maintaining jobs in the coal sector, that essentially competes with the natural gas industry, because many of those plants that have come down are being replaced by natural gas. So how do you view those comments when he's very hard set on saving coal?
Well, our industry supports a true all the above. So we don't believe you should discriminate against any energy source. We don't believe you should, in a punitive way, go after destroying or limiting energy sources. We believe everybody should have the equal opportunity to compete. We believe, because of the vast supply in the United States, that we'll be competitive. And that's what we see today, brought to you primarily by technologies such as hydraulic fracturing, horizontal drilling, vast resource right here at home that really nobody thought about 10 years ago. This is a relatively new phenomenon, but it's very significant. So when we look at energy policy, our belief is we should have a true all the above. We should talk about energy efficiency. We can do better. We've done well as a nation, but we can do better as a nation. We should look at renewables, alternatives, other forms of energy. As I mentioned earlier, we're the leaders in investing in those hopeful breakthroughs. But you put all that together, and that's what our energy policy should look like. It shouldn't be a case of picking friends and winners and losers. Let's let everybody compete equally, have the same rules of the road, and let's see where that takes us, because who it benefits most is the American voter, the American consumer.
So last week, API reached out to its Twitter followers to see what questions they had for you heading into today's event. One of those questions is, what are the benefits of expanded energy exports for our nation's economy, and what are the consumer impacts?
Well, as you look both in natural gas and in oil, as you know, the crude oil export ban was just lifted the end of last year. Longer term, with our vast supply here in the United States, the consumer impacts will be limited, if any. But the huge opportunities are creating the United States as the energy superpower of the world, where we have the ability to produce resource, create jobs right here at home, build the infrastructure right here at home, and as we make ourselves energy secure, then have the opportunity to bless the rest of the world with our product. What does that do? Creates well-paying jobs. Median salary or wage in the United States today is somewhere around $45,000. You look at a production job in the oil and gas industry today, our median is about $110,000 a job. So if we get visionary in what we're trying to do in the energy equation, we ought to step back and look at issues like income inequality, poverty, some of the issues we're hearing on Capitol Hill. What can this energy renaissance do to help society as a whole? Not just job creation and individuals, but what does that mean in terms of creating opportunities for those that are less fortunate? We believe the energy renaissance could be a huge factor in this. But it's going to take vision. It's going to take people putting aside their political ideologies and saying, this is a unique opportunity. It's historic for the United States. How do we seize the moment? That's what we'll encourage them to do.
But the energy renaissance is suffering as a result of market dynamics. Low prices are causing companies to shut down operations. So how do you balance that?
That's what we call the free market, and that takes place in all industries, doesn't it? But as we see the ebb and flow, we're seeing the market work itself out. And eventually that will work itself out. But some of the big beneficiaries are who? It's the American voter, it's the American consumer. So is it disruptive in the short term? Sure it is. Is it a difficult time? Absolutely. Is it challenging for the industry? It is. But this too will pass, and when it does, we need to think of that longer term vision. 10 years ago, no one would have predicted that manufacturing jobs around the world would be returning to the United States, yet they are. And why is that? Because of affordable, reliable energy. It's the key catalyst that really is allowing our economy to reshape itself, to prepare for the next generation, but we can do it in a way that really benefits all Americans. We think that's where our focus should be.
There's one more question from Twitter.
Okay.
Why do oil companies continue to take billions in tax breaks and incentives?
Well, the oil industry gets no subsidies from the federal government, zero, nada. There are those out there that would suggest they do. We are treated, or we expect to be treated, just like everyone else. If you get a deduction for your cost of operations, things like the IDCs, the intangible drilling costs we talk about, we expect to be treated the same. The oil and natural gas industry are some of the highest effective tax rate payers in the United States. We pay millions of dollars every day, over $50 million a day, to the federal government. We not only pay our fair share, some would suggest more than our fair share. Just treat us like all other businesses. Respect the fact that we too need to operate in a global competitive world. In fact, if we'd get over a little bit of the attitude of that question and really focus on the benefits to the American consumer, it would benefit us all in society.
You also have a 30-year head start, though, and some of these new technologies are just starting up. When we talk about leveling the playing field, how do you level it when you have decades
Well,
of...
most of those so-called new technologies, many of which have been around 20, 30 years as well.
All right. Jack, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your
It's always
time.
good to visit with you. Thanks, Monica. Take care.
And now I will invite the panelists up on stage to join me.
Good luck, Carl.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you to API and Jack as well for that wonderful conversation and the invitation to moderate today's discussion about energy and the election. As the public becomes more savvy about the politics, economics, and science of energy and climate issues, it's an especially significant moment in politics that could dramatically change the shape that U.S. energy policy takes. And API has convened today a bipartisan panel to sort of dissect and discuss the dynamics of energy in the 2016 election. I will briefly introduce each panelist, and then we're going to just jump right into Q&A. At the end, we're going to leave about 15 minutes for you all to ask questions, and I believe there will be some mics floating around the room for that to happen. So starting to my left, Sean Spicer, Chief Strategist and Communications Director of the Republican National Committee. Cornell Belcher, President of Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies. Carl Forti, Partner and Co-Founder of BlackRock Group. And Stefan Hankin, Founder and President of Lincoln Park Strategies. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, so starting with a question for all panelists, and feel free to jump in and answer as you wish. Energy is a bit of a unique issue in that it represents, as Jack said, the intersection of so many critical topics to voters. It's an economic question, national security, infrastructure. Why haven't we seen a more robust discussion up until this point in the 2016 election about energy issues? And should we expect that a substantive discussion is around the corner as we head to November?
Have you seen a robust discussion of any issue thus far in 2016? I mean, I think it's an odd political year. I mean, I hope at some point, now that the primaries are sort of settling down, although I think you guys still got a little work to do in your convention, hope to see some, some substantive issues. But I've been actually struck by, on both sides of the primary, quite frankly, there has not been a sort of in-depth discussion about most of the issues that Americans are most concerned about, and look at the news broadcast from yesterday. Look at the news broadcast from the day. They are not necessarily talking about the issues that are impacting most Americans.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'd agree. I mean, I think a lot of it is, if you look at, there's a process piece of this that people are fascinated with. How much money's being raised, who's being hired, how many ads are being played or not. There's certainly a lot of energy. It's just not the actual issue. And then I think as we get into the general, now that we've got, it looks like by the help of the superdelegates, Hillary has won. And now that we've actually got a two-person race, I think that you might see a little bit more of this. I know she's going to try to give a speech on the economy today. Last week you saw one on foreign policy that just turned into like an attack hit. I think that's kind of where we are. I think you might see briefings and policy papers and things put on websites, but I'm not sure that a lot of the discourse is going to delve into deep policy issues. And frankly, I think part of that is that it's a reaction to where the American people are right now. There is a lot of frustration out there. I think that's something that Sanders tapped into, obviously something that Donald Trump is tapping into. That the American people, frankly, are upset. They're angry with their government, the inability of it to provide basic services. And so there is more of a getting things back to showing that the government can work rather than delving into specific issues is kind of where the appetite is right now, I think.
So Sean, Donald Trump recently gave a speech in North Dakota. It was an energy speech. Do you think that it was substantive, and do you think we'll see or hear more substance from him on the topics that he discussed? Everything from the Clean Power Plan to renewables.
I mean, I think you're going to see a lot more of it. It's all relative, though. I think it's a question of, how in depth. But I think you're going to see probably more, as I said, on the, hey, we're going to put out a new policy paper, it'll be on our website, than a lot of the discussions at rallies. He really enjoys going to those things where he's got 20 or 25,000 people. They're the largest. And he's going to, that's just more, he is more of a populist kind of speaker rather than I get in to give wonky speeches at Brookings or Heritage, or that's just not his thing. And so I think you might see a discussion of the issues, but it's not going to be in the standard forums that you've seen them before.
Do you think the President of the United States needs to be a bit of a wonk?
No. I mean, I don't think that, but I don't know that you've ever seen a wonk, at least in modern history. I think, frankly, when you look at the exit polls going back to the Romney election in 2012, when it came down to substantive things, who would do better in the economy, who would have a stronger foreign policy, on every single issue except one, Mitt Romney won. The one issue.
I'm going to want to rejoin it soon.
No, but the one issue that he didn't win is cares about you. And understand, and Obama crushed him 80 to 20. And I think to some degree, the American people want a president that's empathetic to their needs, that understands the frustrations that they have. So it is, I just don't think that that's where presidential elections are in modern history.
I think that's an amazing statement to say that right now we're in a place in our country where we don't want smart people running our government and having keys to the nuclear case. That seems like an amazing thing. We haven't had a wonk, and again, I'm trying not to be actually sort of partisan here, but we haven't had a wonk. I mean, Bill Clinton, very substantive on the issues. Barack Obama, I mean, he was a Harvard professor, very substantive on the issues. Even from George Bush, you had an issue sort of conversation. Right now, we have reality television eating our politics. I think that's a problem not just for Republicans, but a problem for American civilization.
But reality TV is eating up our politics because people want change. You've got the Bernie Sanders faction, you've got the Donald Trump faction. People want change, and that's what's driving this. So that's overriding every other issue out there.
And then you also have to remember where congressional approval right now is at 15%.
Right.
I think John McCain was the one who said we're down to family and friends and no one else. And so, the American public has pretty much thrown in the towel on the government in general. I mean, they just don't think things can get done. So even if there were to be a substantive debate about issues, which I would 100% not expect to have happen at any point in time this year, I think the American public would look at it and be like, I'm not buying it, and I don't think you're going to get it done, because that's just how the reality that is in Washington right now. And we have a very cynical electorate out there, and they will say that they want to hear about issues, but also, in the hyper-partisanship that we live in right now, every issue is pretty much, you come in at it from a partisan angle, right? So there's not much discussion. There's just my side, your side. Let's fight about it. But I think this year, especially at the presidential level, we're going to be hearing you're terrible, you're terrible, you're terrible. And that's about it.
But if you look at what the American people see on television, right? They turn on, they see long TSA lines, the Veterans Administration that can't provide the services and needs to the people who have served this country. There's a point at which, before we get to talking about issues, there is a level of competence that the American people want to see their government operate at. And that's what's happening, what this frustration is. So it's not that they don't want smart people, but I think what they want is a government that functions and provides the basic necessities before they get into what's your energy policy going to be, how are we going to handle this, because they don't believe that the basics are being done.
And if we believe that the basics aren't being done, where do they place most of the blame? Right now you have a Congress with a 15 to 12% job approval, and you have a president from the Bloomberg poll out 2 days ago who's at 53% job approval. And his favorable is higher than anyone right now on the political landscape. And you are looking at a largest sort of growth in our economy in decades, peace and prosperity. Now, is the economy where we want it? No, but we're not losing 700,000 jobs a month the way it was when he put his hand on that Bible. And, so you look at the president, right now, and you look at the executive branch right now, between Congress and the executive branch, and I know we're going to talk about Congress and the Senate at some point, I mean, that's where most of the frustration lies, and it lies there justly.
So when we look at the disruptive nature of this year's, and I think it's fair to maybe call it disruptive. It's dynamic, it's changing, it's different from anything we've seen before of this campaign. How does that have an impact on what we see coming out of Congress in terms of moving legislation right now? And then after the elections, will Congress be able to recover from that disruptiveness?
They're about to go on a 2-month vacation. Nothing's getting done. Bare minimum. We saw all the, the votes in the Senate yesterday on the gun issue, which, and everyone knows, it's not going to come up in the House, regardless of what comes out of the Senate. So, they're gonna come in, they're gonna take a couple votes on nothing in September, and then they're gonna go back and campaign. And depending on what happens in the election, I mean, you could have a lame duck session where, Obama wants to have a few more things for his legacy. That the Republicans might be like, hey, there are a couple things I think we'll get a better shake at now than we will in January if the election goes the way I think it's going to go.
Which way?
I would not put much money on Donald Trump becoming the next president of the United States. So you could have a flurry of action come November, December, depending on what exactly happens in the election. But until that time, I wouldn't bet on much, if anything, happening.
So Sean, recently there was a reported hacking of the DNC servers, and there were documents demonstrating how the DNC planned to target Donald Trump on energy and the environment and climate change. Do you believe the science of climate change? And how does Donald Trump's rejection of the science impact your party more broadly?
So a couple things. One, I thought it was odd that after the TNC gets hacked, the only thing, they've got 200 pages on Donald Trump. It kind of shows you that their opposition research might need a little help.
I think they're good.
That doesn't cover the cliff notes for the books. The planet is changing. I mean, so that's a fact, right? What I believe is really irrelevant. I think that Trump is probably going to lay out a lot more of where he wants to go with the environment, but that's for him to delve into more than what I personally believe.
But can climate change be addressed if the science is being called into question?
Sure. I think you can do responsible things. I mean, there are things that we can be doing with clean technology that's just good for business. There are things that you can do that business has done that we can all agree upon. Sometimes it's actually better business, sometimes it's in the best interest of a community, and so you don't necessarily need to debate the science piece of it. You can just debate, is this good business, and it happens to be good for the environment. And I think a lot of the stuff that came out of the study that API did shows that they're not mutually exclusive. There's not a binary choice. You have to say we have to be good for the environment or good for business. There are things that business is doing that's in their best interest that helps the environment.
And it's things they're doing on their own. As Jack pointed out, we're lowering our carbon emissions, but you don't have to have overly burdensome government regulations in order to do that.
So Carl, I had asked Jack a similar question. I'll pose it to you now. This promise from Donald Trump to save the coal industry, the market dynamics right now that are currently at play don't necessarily support that idea, right? We see utilities moving towards other sources of energy, moving away from coal. We saw the major 4 coal companies declaring bankruptcy as a result of these market dynamics. So how does that industry get saved? Can it actually be saved? And does that happen to the detriment of natural gas, renewables, other sources of energy?
I don't think it's to the detriment of. I mean, you know, coal still provides a vital resource that is used. And as long as there's a need for it, there'll be the workers to provide it. You know, I think it is very much an all of the above strategy. And we need to continue to be sort of all-inclusive and look at all the means we have at our disposal to provide the energy we have, or that we need. And this is, you know, we are now an energy leader. And that plays off into many other issues, whether it's jobs in the economy, whether it's national security. There are a lot of things that feeds into.
What's the narrative that you think that should emerge on coal? You know, we see Hillary Clinton coming out with a package to help coal workers recover from any lost jobs and potentially place them in other sectors. So what is the narrative then on the other side, you know, when she's providing this package? What should the Trump campaign be doing?
You know, look, I mean, I think if she believes the package is going to save these towns across America that rely on coal and are built around the coal mines, she's fooling herself. That's not going to happen. I mean, she is going after people's livelihoods and a way of life that is, you know, 50, 60, 70, 100 years, you know, going on. And so this is, if she's going to try to change the narrative by offering somebody a package to put them in another industry, it's a joke.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, truth of the matter is it's tough, but the reality is we got to deal with this. We got to be real about it. I mean, it's not Hillary Clinton that's putting the coal industry out of business, right? I mean, we're supposed to believe in free market, right? I mean, coal industry. Everyone in this room probably has a sense that the coal industry right now, on the competitive level, there are problems, right? So as opposed to ignoring those problems, let's come up with a narrative here about how we solve for that problem for the next century. I don't think most of us think. I mean, even with clean coal, right now it's in a tough spot. So why can't we as a people figure out, okay, what comes next for these communities that are going to be impacted by the downturn in this technology? What technology is doing with other places? Now, you know, again, not even from a partisan perspective, but if you're a partisan or Democrat, you have to have understanding that, you know what, the coal industry is not going to rise again. It's not. So how do we solve for that? How do we solve for that problem? And ignoring it and saying, you know, just ignoring it and putting our head in the sand is leaving those people dangling in a way that's I think is counterproductive.
I think there's a big difference between having the coal industry go out of business because that's what the market mandates, and government regulation putting them out of business, which is a totally different scenario, which is where we are right now.
I agree, and if you think that government regulations is what's killing if you think, you know, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton is what's killing the coal industry, that's one way to look at it. But I think the idea that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama are killing the coal industry is just an amazing statement.
Well, I think what's interesting on this issue is you're now getting into areas, and especially in states like Ohio, West Virginia, where you have both coal and natural gas extraction happening. You have some interesting dynamics, and especially like in like Southeast Ohio, where you have large like state Senate districts where you know, like Senator Lou Gentile represents most of the Southeast part of Ohio in the state Senate there, and he's dealing in the South, it's coal, in the North, it's natural gas. And you know, here I think you see what I would argue I'll call it a balanced approach, in the sense that, you know, both industries are fighting for their livelihood, they're fighting for relevance, they're fighting for help, and so it's cutting through some of the partisanship that we're seeing on some other issues, or at least in other areas on this issue, where you have members who are representing both industries. And I think it's interesting to look at areas like that, like Southeast Ohio, of like, how are they handling this? How are they looking at the coal towns and saying, you know, how are we going to help you, knowing that this the coal is not coming back, to Cornell's point. And at the same, trying to get into that, we're not really trying to pick winners or losers, but we're certainly trying to make sure that if you're on the losing end of the spectrum, you're not going to just be left out in the dark.
Let's talk about fracking. How should Hillary Clinton shape her messaging on fracking? I know Bernie Sanders has a very particular view about hydraulic fracturing. Hillary Clinton's is different. How should she be shaping her message? Cornell, do you want to?
I'm going to give that to Stefan.
Okay.
I think the politically, no, I mean, look, it also, a lot of it comes down to like, who are you talking to? And what states are in play. And look, elections come down to winning. And so if she's campaigning in North Dakota, I would tell her she's campaigning in the wrong state, but they're going to have a very different view of fracking than, say, in North Carolina. So she's going to have to play it smartly. And look, I think what we heard here before about the all of the above, I think that's clearly, that is language everyone can get behind. I mean, the difference is once you get in office, everyone's at the table, what's going to come out of that. But I would expect to see to hear that type of approach. Like, we're not ruling anything out, but we're going to be, we want to make sure that we're taking a balanced approach to a lot of things, but we're going to allow the local areas to make sure that they have control over these things. And look, if we're going to go after, if we're going to be doing things like fracking, let's make sure the science is there. Let's make sure we're doing it safely and not just a blanket, drill wherever the hell you want and enjoy it. But and the interesting thing with fracking, especially in states like North Carolina, is you're getting into a lot of issues that again are cutting across partisan lines. So you're dealing with things like forced pooling, where people have to give over their land if a certain % of their neighbors belong to it. And you get when you get into issues like, oh, you only bought your house in 6 feet down, and then the developer owns from 6 feet under. Now these are issues these aren't just Democrat or Republican issues. You're getting into things that start cutting across partisan lines, which makes these fights interesting, to say the least.
Anyone else want to jump in on fracking? Cornell, I will get you to answer one of my questions. I'm going to pose another one to you. Actor Mark Ruffalo recently urged the Platform Drafting Committee to take a hard line against fracking. He said natural gas isn't a bridge fuel, but a gangplank to a more rapidly changing climate. Do you think that views like that should get any play in the campaign?
Well, look, I believe in a free market of ideals. I mean, everyone has the right to put their ideals out there and have them debated. And ultimately, the campaign's going to do what I don't, thankfully, I'm not working on this campaign season. I have 2 presidentials. You never want to do another one. But I mean, that campaign's got to maneuver. To Stefan's point, I mean, that campaign's got to maneuver to where the majority of the votes are around most of these issues. And contrast. I mean, campaigns are fundamentally about contrast. Unless you're running against an incumbent, and then you want to make it a referendum. But typically they're about sort of who wins the contrast. And so you want to be where the majority of the votes are, particularly the majority of the votes in these battleground states, and you want to pick and choose your issues. This is probably not going to be an issue that is going to be front and center of any Democratic platform or any Democratic or the campaign season. I mean, we've already talked about how a lot of these issues aren't being addressed during this campaign season. And guess what? Unless you force the campaigns to address your issues, they're probably not going to address your issues. So I would think the campaign is going to land here where the majority of the votes are where the American public is, not because of what some actor tends to think we should do.
I think the interesting thing is, we tend to garner the lion's share of the media attention when it comes to platform and issues. Last cycle, and I think we'll do it again. But I think if you listen to what Sanders is trying to do when he goes to Philadelphia, they are not just going to roll over. He really wants to move fundamentally to the left. And I think one of the things that's often overlooked when comparing the two sides is most of the issues with Trump, frankly, come down to personality. They don't like his tone. They don't like his words. Right? I mean, for the most part, you're not seeing major splits in our party regarding policy. They're not saying, hey, I don't like his energy plan. I don't like his position on fracking. I don't like where he comes out on taxes. It's the tone and some of the words, et cetera. But on the Democratic side, I think that you do see, I mean, you look at the divide between what Bernie Sanders is talking about, where he is, where he wants the Democratic Party to be, versus what Hillary Clinton wants to project. It is hugely different. And there are massive policy differences that they're going to have to grapple with in Philadelphia. And I know that a lot of them will be trying to be swept under the rug, but fracking, and energy are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, he really wants to go to the far extreme left on a lot of issues, and I think not just domestic policy, but foreign policy. So whether it's Israel or other engagements around the world, or a lot of these policies, you're going to see, I think, a lot of this displayed in Philadelphia. And to the extent that we can help, we will push that out there.
Yeah, but
Don't you think that there are disagreements within the Republican Party that go beyond tone?
Sure, of course. I mean, that would be silly to not acknowledge it, but there are not major.
Speaker Ryan telling delegates to.
Yeah, but but they're not voting their conscience because he's saying, "Gosh, we fundamentally disagree with where he comes down on, on how to engage the Middle East or how to." They're not. The concerns that you see from our members largely have to do with tone and rhetoric. They're not issue based.
just to throw a little reminder in, there's this wall thing between the U.S. and Mexico that's kind of an
Right,
issue.
but
I don't hear the business community being like, that wall is an awesome idea, we're totally with him. I just wish your tone was a little bit nicer.
Okay, so let's take the rhetoric out and get back to policy, okay, for a second. Do you realize in every bill that's been put forward that Hillary Clinton has voted for, there has been some kind of wall or fence in legislation? So if we actually get into the policy piece of this, she's voted for those mechanisms.
Well, no, but
We're getting into real
No, we're
inside
getting- I mean,
baseball BS, and we wonder why the Americans hate the
No, but-
politics.
because-
Shocking. Things
But
like
again, But
this.
if you actually get into the substance of the issue, Hillary Clinton has voted for walls, fences, in-border legislation, immigration legislation. So the fact of the matter is that what you really have a problem with when it comes to that issue that you just brought up was the tone and the rhetoric on how it's addressed.
I mean, that's just. I mean, by the way, I mean, bravo.
I know that's a lot of facts,
But no, but it's great. It's great spin. I mean, this is what. I mean, and bravo. I mean, communications people. This is what you're supposed to do. Truth of the matter is, yeah, in probably most of the legislation that's around border security, that people take votes for. There's some funding there for walls and for fences. It is fundamentally different from what Donald Trump is saying, and this ideal that I mean, listen to. I mean, don't take my word from it. Go back and read anything Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, has to say about Donald Trump. There are some fundamental problems that a lot of the Republicans have with Donald Trump. I mean, but I don't even have to say that. You can just look at the news coverage of that. Going back to our convention, the Democratic convention, absolutely, Bernie Sanders has some strong feelings about where this country should go. Bernie Sanders lost. And will he dominate the conversation in Philadelphia? No. Again, he lost. And to the point about superdelegates, she was helped by superdelegates. Yeah, so was Barack Obama. So was Bill Clinton. I mean, they're part of the process. She won. No, that's fundamentally not true. She has. Okay, we can follow back up on this, but she's won the majority, the vast majority of the votes in the primaries, and she's won the vast majority of the delegates in the primaries. She's ahead on all counts. Now, will he have a say in Philadelphia? Yes, but really, when was the last time any of you heard anything about what the Rules Committee did, or about the Republican platform or the Democratic platform? I mean, these just are not pieces of paper that. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, I worked on the Obama campaign. I can't tell you what the 2012 platform was. I mean, none of us can. What's important is, in fact, what are the candidate who you're going to vote for, where they are on these issues from a policy perspective, and where they are on these issues from a values perspective.
But I think what you're kind of seeing here is like this campaign just is not going to be about issues as much as we would like it to be about issues. It's just not. And I mean, I know we haven't exactly had like warm, fuzzy presidential elections over the last few goes, but like I would expect this one to be hands down the ugliest, and for anyone who lives in a swing state, I feel really bad for you. You get to deal with this. One of the beauties, if you live in a place that's not a toss-up, you don't have to see the ads.
But we do see the issues emerging. We see the issues emerging more so in House and Senate races, governor's races. What impact could the presidential race have on those races? And which are the races that you're watching most closely where you think energy really is playing a role?
I mean, I mentioned North Carolina before. I think that's an interesting state with fracking happening there, or potentially happening there. I'm just trying to think of the other state. I mean, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Those are going to be the ones. But and then Ohio, like I talked about before, is really interesting just because of the coal fracking dynamic that's happening there. Same thing in Pennsylvania. So I think those are going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be certainly interesting to see how the candidates on the Senate level handle those issues. Because as you start moving down the ballot, it becomes more and more about issues. And especially when you're dealing with state level stuff, so governor's races, and I've even found state senate races, state legislative races, we're actually still talking about issues versus most of the federal stuff is just the normal garbage that all these races have become nationalized. It's fairly depressing, but there's very little that's different from race to race. I mean, every once in a while you get a really dynamic candidate, but in general, it's D versus R, and not much.
And if I were consulting the energy industry, I would argue that most of your resources probably should go not to these top of the ticket federal races, because to Stefan's point, a lot of these battles are at the state level right now. So from a just complete strategic standpoint, I would put a lot of attention and resources in trying to understand and influence is probably the wrong word. Influence some of these some of these down ballot races, because that's where decision making around a lot of these key issues that you care most about is engaging in the state house level.
Well, that is true, but there's also a lot of federal regulation that impacts the industry also, and that can't be ignored. But yes, you look at New York, for example, there's not the statewide races you're not going to impact, but you look at the congressional level or the state senate or state house level, absolutely, when you get to Western New York, you're talking about fracking other places. That's an issue.
What role do you all think Bernie Sanders will play on Hillary Clinton's campaign and the views that she might take moving forward? There are some votes at play there. You're making a heart gesture.
No, that's a zero. I think.
Zero.
Look, I think they will prepare the hate tweets from all the Bernie lovers. So look, they're going to give them they'll throw them a few bones. They'll say, okay, here's a couple lines of the platform, as Cornell said, that no one cares about. But I don't see. I think it kind of ending there, right? Personally, I think he's playing this thing poorly, because his height of quote-unquote power is right now, right? He's still got people ginned up, people are still behind him, but 80% of his supporters say they're fine with voting for Hillary Clinton, which is 15 points higher than Hillary supporters to Obama back in 2008, and obviously, they all came around. I would expect 90% of Sanders supporters to come around, but the longer he sort of drags this out, the better chance he has of annoying his supporters. So I think his smart play would be to sort of try to get what he wants now, and then use his supporters, use his email list, use his ability to fundraise, and start, thinking about what the next step is, which is going to be him back in the Senate, and how does he want to play that out? He's done at the presidential level in any kind of meaningful way.
It's going to be interesting to watch. You said 80% of the Hillary, or 90% of the Hillary people went to Obama in the end last time. I think this time it's going to be interesting because the Sanders-Clinton rift is more ideological, and Obama was offering hope and change and inspiration that she's not. It was a much different campaign in 2008 than we're seeing right now, and I don't know that they will. That'd be interesting as an operative from my standpoint, if they will go back, because I don't know if they will, or do they just stay home? Because they're not voting for
and what percentage too, right?
Yeah.
The problem is these elections are so close that you do need, that delta, if you have 5% or a key demographic that doesn't come out, that's a big deal. And so the folks that Sanders is speaking to, the difference too in their party, is that those are the activists, right? Those are the guys, the environmentalists, the hardcore folks on the left, the real progressive types, that put out signs, that march, that sleep in tents, and do, those are the guys, those are your army. And if a chunk of them, if the young voters or a piece of that coalition doesn't come on board with her, that could impact her ability to win.
You can hold. Whatever you got to say to make yourself feel better at the end of the day. But if a handful of young Sanders supporters in California don't turn out, it doesn't matter. This is a state by state thing, and the math the math was going to be tough for Republicans to begin with in this election, just based on the fact of demographics and how this country is changing and how the Republican Party has not been keeping up with that. So, I mean, any Democrats coming in with pretty much 240, 242 electoral votes like in the bag, and there's a very small delta to make up, and with the rhetoric that's coming out of Trump's mouth, the ability to hit the 25% among minority voters is slim at best, which means he has to win this with white voters, which means he has to win Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan to have a chance. And the only state he has even a slim chance at this point in time is maybe picking off Ohio. And even there, he's behind in the polls, he's behind in every kind of measurable, every metric that we have to look at. So like, it's just, a couple Sanders supporters who are pissed off, like not showing up, isn't going to make the difference in this thing when there's such a gaping difference among minority voters, which is a growing, that's what's growing. The white population is shrinking. It's going to be down to like probably 70% in this election. So, sure, it's a good talking point for the Republicans, but it's not going to make the math is not there to say that it's going to make a difference.
I'm actually more cautious. One of the beauties of going back to 2008 was we expanded the electorate. I mean, 11% of the voters in 2008 were people who hadn't voted before, which is an incredible thing to have actually happen, where you have 11% of your electorate are new voters. A large swath of those, the plurality of those new voters were actually younger voters, right? And we worked very hard to expand that electorate and bring in new younger voters. Democrats do really well when younger voters make up a larger proportion of the electorate than seniors. In 2008, 2012, younger voters made up a larger swath of our electorate than did seniors. In 2010, 2014, seniors made up a larger swath of the electorate than younger voters. You almost have two electorates battling for control of America. Why I'm cautious, and I think it's problematic, and I think Democrats really have to pay a lot of attention to this, is when you look at those voters who came in to the process in 2008 and returned to that process in 2012, much to the shock of many, and you see this trend line among younger voters anyways, they're growing more independent. They're a lot less tied strongly to one party or the other. And a lot of those voters who came in 2008 and 2012, those younger voters, they were Obama voters. They were not Democratic voters. And understanding the difference between that, I think, is key for Democrats. And a lot, regardless of all the ink that Bernie Sanders got around, and all respect for Senator Sanders for his campaign, but all the ink that he got for winning young voters, the truth of the matter is when you look at the primaries this time around versus primaries in 2008, you do have a large drop-off in participation. So I think Democrats have to be cautious about holding this Obama coalition. I mean, it is a big deal for Democrats to win back-to-back majorities. I mean, I don't think in our lifetimes, I'm saying we're young, our lifetimes we've seen the Democrat win back-to-back majorities, right? So it's a really big deal, but understanding that coalition was made up of a lot of young people who are not going to fit the likely voter screen in most of your research, I think is important, and I think that is the caution that I would throw to Democrats, to the Clinton campaign right now is your coalition that you need to get to 51% is made up of a lot of young people who are not strong Democrats.
Sean, heading into next month, the Republican convention, how are you preparing?
There's a camera there.
I've seen the time-lapse photos. They're getting the arena ready.
We're doing great. I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a fun convention. They've got a really top-notch team out there in Cleveland that's integrated well with the Trump folks. I think there's no, Trump has made it very clear that he wants to add an element of pizzazz and showbiz to this, and I think they're going to do that. There's going to be, I think, a level of excitement. And I think, frankly, if you look at whether it's the debates or the turnout, I mean, I remember 2 years ago where I was on a sort of regular trip that I do to New York to talk to a lot of the news execs, and they literally were telling me, hey, look, we're not going to do politics in the morning shows anymore. Like, it's just no one wants to tune in. Now it leads at 7:05 in every show. right? There is an appetite for Americans they're really interested in the election, in politics, maybe not in the issues, but in politics. And so I think the conventions are going to hit on both sides to some degree. Record turnout. You saw there was a story this morning that the Hillary campaign is reaching out to a lot of celebrities. They're trying to create more of a showbiz show aspect to their convention as well. So I think from a ratings perspective, it's going to be very high. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement going on in Cleveland. We're just going to continue what the Cavs started the other night.
I tell you, I cannot wait for the Republican convention. I mean, I will be watching.
I will say, I think the first debate might be like the most watched debate ever. Because I mean, Liz, like, I want to see how this thing's going down. Right? This is going to be, I mean, then it'll probably like peter off after the first one, but like that first one.
I'm not so sure about that. May get better.
So we can expect an exciting convention. I want to go down the line. I want each panelist to answer. Do you think Donald Trump will ultimately be the Republican Party's nominee?
Of course.
He won it fair and square. He did.
Absolutely.
I believe that there are some questions from the audience.
Don't we get to ask if Hillary's going to be the nominee? I just think that's fair.
Going down the line, because Hillary will be the nominee.
She won it fair and square.
I think it depends on when the indictment comes down.
Here we go. Here we go.
Do we have microphones in here? Yeah, okay.
You do. Hi, Randall Luthia, the National Ocean Industries Association. Thanks, Jack. Great panel. I want to bring us back to what we started with. If you're involved in traditional forms of energy, mainly oil and natural gas, you looked at the numbers, and they're great numbers, concerning how important that is to the economy, how important it is to voters. So this is a two-part question. One, all of you represent some, or at least are very knowledgeable of different aspects of what the voters are coming up. One, do you feel the numbers are accurate? And two, as long as the consumer isn't paying $4 a gallon of gasoline and doesn't have to mortgage their house to heat their homes, do those numbers mean anything in this election?
Which numbers can you just?
Jump from the API poll.
From the poll?
Yeah.
I mean,
No. So I just want to. Here's what I'll tell you. I think everything in that poll makes sense. The question is always like when you're dealing with politics. You can believe in something. Does it activate you? Does it motivate you? Is that what drives you to vote? So a lot of times people will say, well, this candidate's pro-life or pro-choice or whatever, and then you look, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what people are voting on or what is a determinant on it. What I would argue both from, and where I think API has played this really smart, is not waiting till that time that the issue drives up. Educating people in terms of the impact that the industry has on jobs and how it impacts their daily lives is where I think this campaign has been smart, because it's not just, hey, we'll wait till the moment that it matters or when they're paying attention. It's a sustained effort to make sure that voters are constantly aware of how energy impacts their lives, how many jobs it supports. And so my point would be to say that if you look at your industry and the jobs that are tied to it, the more you can talk to your members, your member companies, and make sure that, number one, their employees understand that. And I think this is one of the big issues that I think I see a lot in the corporate world, where they come up to Washington and they say, hey, we've got this problem. And the biggest issue is that their own employees aren't being their advocates, because the House and Senate members, and this isn't rocket science, right? The number one thing that a member is looking at are, what do the people in my district or state care about this issue? How does it impact them? What are they telling me? And if the people that are employed aren't actually reaching out saying, my job depends on this piece of legislation, or whether or not this regulation stops or is implemented, then that's a big problem. And so the first thing I would do is make sure that employees of organizations or companies that are members of yours or whatever understand the issues that are important and are communicating with their members of Congress.
I think that's smart and spot on. I would add that you have an opportunity now, because this is not a back and forth conversation, and that was a great poll. But truth of the matter is, if you wait until it's a back and forth as a contrast, almost everything, I get paid to tear that apart and contrast that in a way that moves voters. So I would say two things. One is be prepared, start preparing for a pitched campaign where the other side is going to contrast that, and how do you persuade voters in a contrast back and forth, right? We know from the poll that most voters are where most voters are on these issues, and they're on their side. However, there are really good people going to be on the other side who are going to contrast that. So I think it'd be interesting now to sort of get into the details of what a pitch back and forth contrast and how do you win that persuasion argument. Two is right now, I mean, spot on. You are in a place right now where, he or she who defines the debate wins the debate, right? Whether you're Republican or Democrat. Right now, you have an opportunity to have a conversation almost in a vacuum in a way that you can define and dominate the debate in that conversation. Use this time right now wisely to begin to sort of have that conversation and push your messages without sort of strong pushback or contrast from the other side right now.
I would just add too that both right, it's motivation, but what's motivating the voters now, it's not necessarily energy itself, but it's energy's role through jobs in the economy, the #1 issue, and national security, which depending on the week of the month or what's happened recently is #1 or #2. And the increased energy production and everything we're doing in the country right now is leading to better jobs and it's leading to more national security. And if you're playing it through that lens, you can absolutely get involved in the debate and have traction this cycle.
Yeah, and you sort of said it in your question. I mean, when we're looking at, what are we at, 230 average gallon? It only cost me, $40 to fill up my tank. So if it goes up to $4 a gallon by the election, it's going to be a big issue. If it stays around this level, it's probably not going to be a huge issue. And then also remembering that where the voters are is going to obviously affect their relationship with energy, right? And as the country continues to self-sort themselves, and you have more Democrats in urban areas and more Republicans in more rural areas, there's just a natural difference in how energy relates. But as long as energy prices are generally low, it's going to be tough to really motivate people. And to Sean's point, I think the poll is, the poll is the poll, right? I mean, I think people genuinely agree with the questions that were asked. But is it a motivating factor for folks? And when energy prices are low, for most people, it's not going to be what drives them to go out to vote or who they're going to vote for. But as everyone has sort of said, I mean, it's a smart play, right? You don't want to wait until it is a huge issue. You want to be laying the groundwork for when it becomes a big issue. And we know that prices go like this, so you want to be ready for when it comes up. And so getting out there and doing something about it now is the smart way to approach it. That was free.
Any other questions from the audience?
James Hansen, who was a former NASA scientist who kind of sounded the alarm about climate change, is really advocating worldwide now for greater use of nuclear energy. And there's some movement in Congress to try to encourage that. Seems to be a lot of splits on the Democratic side, just as we see with natural gas, for instance, where a lot of even the environmental groups don't like natural gas either. But is that an area for some potential compromise and bipartisan agreement on nuclear energy? Because there are no carbon emissions from nuclear energy, and right now it's 60% of the clean energy, and there's a lot more potential with advanced nuclear reactors and so on. Is that an area of bipartisan agreement for a major source of electricity in the future?
I mean, I think we've always been, that all of the above strategy. I think nuclear, it's just more, I mean, you really do get into the community issue then in terms of where it's located, where the reactor is, what we're doing to deal with the waste. But we use it, I mean, we've been sailing with this, our Navy's been doing this for 50 years, so this is not, I look at it like if we can continue to create jobs that's safer and cleaner, sure.
There's a real cost issue, though, especially when we're talking about the advanced nuclear technologies.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's, look, it's not what you hear in the political arena, but, we can't drill our way out of every single problem, and we can't just go, it's like, oh, we're just going to do solar and wind, and then our problems are solved. So I think if you're serious about it, I think everything has to be on the table. But as Sean said, there are big issues around it. Obviously, I mean, like we saw the big fight over was it Yucca Mountain.
Yucca Mountain,
You know, it's like that. Those kind of things have to be put into place, and if agreement can come up with, you know, what are we going to do with that, then I think there's potential for this. But you do see, and I'm going to forget which groups, but like recently a couple of the environmental groups sort of proclaimed their openness to nuclear. So I think there is definitely potential down that path, but there are clearly some big sticking points that have to get worked through.
And do you think Reid leaving the Senate ushers in a period of compromise on nuclear?
I mean, you're still going to have 2 senators and 3 representatives from Nevada.
Right.
I think I got that number right. You know, like I mean, it's always going to be, it's not my backyard, but I think there's always potential to just open it up and like let the free market, you know, kind of do a free market thing where it's like, look, this is what we're offering. Any states want to, you know, like you want it, step up. And hey, you know, here's potentially a way that you can bring a lot of jobs to your area, but
I think
that's going to be up to the states.
I think I'm for nuclear as long as it's not in my backyard, which is the fundamental problem with nuclear and the politics around that, regardless of what side you're on. I mean, it is. I mean, there's not a great groundswell for nuclear, especially when looking back on what happened recently in Japan, and most of the polling that I see on it. I mean, Americans are, you know, they are hesitant about. And this, by the way, it's a really sort of complicated technology and energy that most Americans really don't, quite frankly, understand. I think to get a real push on nuclear, you would need a really well-funded campaign to move the ball on nuclear and sort of raise the issue, the information around the issue in a way that I think is going to be helpful, which right now we don't have.
Well, you'd also need a champion legislatively, somebody who's willing to fight hard. In the same way that Reid has opposed Yucca Mountain, you need someone that's going to say, I'm going to drive this through, and I'm going to cash in a lot of chits for it, and I don't know that currently exists. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm saying, but you would have to have somebody or a president that made that a huge priority.
And then you get into the details about cost. I mean, like to your point, it's really expensive, and where are you going to get the money? We're going to raise taxes.
So I just wanted to revisit 2 things that you spoke to earlier. The first was down ballot races, and then the second was Secretary Clinton's comments on coal. West Virginia has a governor's race this year, and the Kentucky legislature, which is the last legislature in the Southeast that is not entirely red, as most of those members are up for re-election. Do you think that those comments will have a major impact on those races, or do you think that their fate had been set in motion during this administration?
Both. I mean, if you're, whether or not, I mean, again, just politically speaking, take the issue aside. If you're a Democratic legislator, you either are siding with this administration or Hillary Clinton, your fate is tied. I mean, that's every ad's going to be against you on that, saying that you're costing jobs and this is, you know, and to the extent that you can distance yourself, I guess, but I have a hard time thinking unless you're really entrenched, like you've been there for 30 years and everyone knows you and it's a familiar kind of thing and it's a small, compact district. But I think if you're locally, you're going to get toast.
I think, look, if I were working on campaigns there, I mean, and this is not rocket science, is what any of us would do is I would try to make the campaign localize it, make it about sort of me and what I've been doing and who I am and where I am on the issue. I mean, in the end, you know, every candidate has to run his or her own race, and look, it's a tough territory for Democrats. I mean, that's just a tough territory for Democrats. I don't think any of us would be surprised that Democrats aren't doing well in those red areas. However, I would look at it as an opportunity, if I were a Democrat running there, is to try to change the narrative about the future and about, you know, not only you but your kids and your grandkids, and tie it to change around that industry. So I think there are ways that Democrats can talk about it, but it's tough.
I mean, Allison Lundgren Grimes lost 24% of the Democrat primary vote against nobody in that Senate race. That had nothing to do with Hillary Clinton's comments, obviously. It had to do with the Obama administration's record on coal. So this, you know, is it just Hillary? No, but the 8-year record is definitely going to have an impact in West Virginia and Kentucky both.
Yeah, and you know, a state like West Virginia has been moving away from the Democrats for a while. I think Obama in 08 just sort of accelerated that movement, and it's not going to come back on the federal level anytime soon. And you know, and you have Senator Manchin, and once he decides not to run, I'm going to pretty much say that seat's probably gone for Democrats too. But then, you know, on the flip side, you look at the states that are coming online for Democrats, and so for every West Virginia we're giving up, you know, we're now picking up a Colorado. Like Georgia's about to come online as a swing state. You know, Arizona's going to be coming on after that. So until the dynamic changes, like the advantage, you know, at least on the presidential level, is still with the Democratic Party when you look at the math. But you know, back to the congressional level, I mean, the fate is pretty much set. I mean, we were talking earlier. I mean, we got like 10 competitive races. Maybe like we can run that up to 20 if we want to be really generous. Out of 435, you know, so like, if you have a D or an R next to your name is going to dictate whether you win. But on the state level, that's where this can have a trickle-down effect, these kind of comments. So, you know, the smart campaign, the smart legislator, the smart challenger is going to have a good answer for, you know, if you're a Democrat or you're supporting Hillary Clinton and what's your view on coal. But to Cornell's point, it's, you know, you can still localize those races, and you should. Whereas, you know, congressional and up, they're just nationalized, and it's really hard to get that separation. But at the state level, you can still do that, and if you do it smartly, they're certainly not helpful comments in places like, you know, in coal country, but I think you can work around it.
We have time for one more question from the audience. Anyone?
We put them to sleep.
Oh, no. We have a couple here.
Abby Seidler, American Geosciences Institute. Do any of you have an idea to what extent either party will support federal funding for advanced energy technologies?
Can we get another question?
I have no clue.
I have no idea.
Sorry.
Bipartisan agreement.
Let's get that other question.
I want the answer to be yes. How's that?
Lots.
Good morning, Paula Glover from the American Association of Blacks in Energy. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about kind of the minority vote. It seems to me that on both parties talk with these communities and my communities about socioeconomic issues. They talk a lot about, if you're talking about environmental issues, but we don't talk a lot about wealth. We don't talk a lot about, to these communities, about small business. We don't talk about jobs, even as it relates to this industry. And so while I think API does a really great job of trying to do outreach to minority communities, when you don't have legislators and people who are running for office do resonate that message, I'm really kind of confused about how is there an expectation that you're going to bring these people on as voters for issues that they care about, but that also can help expand a party base?
I think there's a great opportunity, and hats off to API and Spooner is working on this, because there is a great potential for I mean, you have communities of color that are hungry for economic advancement and higher wages. I mean, right now, sort of the top issue really isn't about job creation, but it's about I have a job, but my job sucks. And your industry, you know, is a great place for the hopes and dreams of so many in the minority community. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for your community to speak to this growth and economics sort of in your industry in a way that helps tie this growing, the ascending American electorate to your industry in a very important way that not only be important for you economically, but also politically as this community grows. I mean, if I were looking for places where if I were the energy industry where I would go to look, I would look at sort of how do we further, and I know API is working on this, but how do we further, you know, grow and touch and bring in these communities of color around this industry from an economic standpoint and have an economics conversation with them about the American dream and what you all offer in a way that right now, I don't know if there's another industry out there, especially when you look at low to medium skilled workers. I mean, what industry out there right now offers the kind of opportunity in economics and and growth that your industry offers. That's a wonderful story, I think, that you can go in these communities and talk to them about in a way that no other industry could possibly do.
All right, we're going to wrap it right there. Thank you to the panelists for that fascinating discussion.